She joined this competition because she loves to spread a positive message. She is a writer, and she loves all things literary. She comes before us at the behest of two of her teachers, Mr. Parker and Miss Horn. She is ready to present to you her speech on the power and the purpose of education. Please join me in welcoming Miss Sadiyah Faruk.
Being a Muslim prompts one to believe that in your life you will receive a great deal of opposition. Wearing a headscarf only serves to make that a guarantee. However, not all of that opposition is from those of other faiths. Just as Dr. King himself received opposition from his own black people, so have I received opposition from my own Muslim people. The point of conflict was much the same in both cases: pride. Dr. King enticed the black people of America to do something they had been afraid to do for many years, to be proud of being black. Similarly, now the time has come for the Muslim people to respond to that same calling. When I was a young girl just entering my teenage years, I stood in a room full of students older than me at a conference. I raised my hand and dared to oppose them. I dared to ask, "Why are you ashamed?" They laughed at me. My own Muslim people, whom I had been taught to represent ever since my birth, laughed in my face. I was an outcast. That day inspired me to make a resolution, a goal, a dream. A dream that someday we will all be educated so that we all may be proud. Society today has established a flipping burgers ideology towards education. We ourselves have been successfully brainwashing our peers and future generations into believing that an air of indifference surrounding education is the proper way to go. Furthermore, the consequences of this societal brainwashing impact more than just the nation's average GPA. Yep. It affects the mental and physical health of our students, either dooming their futures to a failing economy or reducing their mental stability to a jittering mess of nerves. The education system in this country was once its basis for furthering the success of its citizens, and now the time has come to acknowledge the flaws in this system so that we may begin to further American society once again. I come from a family that was built off of education. Teaching stretches back throughout my family for generations. One lesson was pounded throughout my familial history, resounding off the walls of our inner conscience. That lesson of knowledge is power, and power brings you success. Woo! If you ask the average American what he thought guaranteed his freedom in the United States, he would probably reply, "My rights." As stated in the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. However, if you are not educated, how would you know of these rights? Dr. King saw the great injustice being done to his people by their inability to be properly educated. He understood that these so-called unalienable rights are useless if you are not educated enough to understand them. Dr. King was trying to educate his people because he, out of all people, understood that crucial lesson of knowledge is power. My mother was born into a type of environment where education was the center of the family. She grew up being cared for by 5 other sisters while they all went to school. From the moment she could walk, she carried around a little backpack filled with one book that she kept tearing apart because she was so young. She had heard tales of a hyperbolized America and was expecting to see a dream world. However, when she arrived, she saw a very different America to the one she had imagined in her youth. She saw a society riddled by the same problem that has haunted every empire in existence. That problem being that with affluence comes complacency, and with complacency comes downfall. American students, she told me, have lost the vital importance of education. It's true, this abundance and wealth of knowledge around us, the opportunities pouring out from every direction, have made us lose sight of education's original goal. Education should elevate us beyond the faults of society, such as prejudice and ignorance. However, education should not simply prompt us to be tolerant. Rather, it should invite us to accept others and their cultures. This acceptance over tolerance way of thinking allows us to reinterpret Dr. King's message. He was not simply talking about tolerance, rather he was talking about acceptance, because only through acceptance can we truly be the United States of America. However, before acceptance, we need education, and the state of education in America is grim. Education has been devalued in America, even while it becomes increasingly essential to success. We must remember that Dr. King himself was an educated man. He was a remarkably intelligent man entering Morehouse College at the young age of 15. He then went on to receive the Pearl Plaque Award for being an outstanding student. All this is evidence that Dr. King understood the vitality of education. We must ask ourselves, where have we gone so terribly wrong? When did we put individual wealth above that of our collective understanding? The opportunities that were once so numerous in education are now lessening substantially. When did we become such a self-centered society that today, in this economic condition, funding for public education and funding for teachers is being cut first? Provide for the very future of our species should be a desperate last resort, if an option at all. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Intelligence plus character. That is the goal of true education. To bring back true education in America, we must bring back the character in our society that first allowed for education to prosper." Child psychologist B.S. Skinner said, "We shouldn't teach great books. We should teach a love of reading." To bring back true education in America, we need to rethink the way we do education. There is only a small population of students that truly understand the purpose of education, and they are left to scramble together the time to complete enormous amounts of work that accumulate at a ridiculous pace. In children and adolescents, the most commonly diagnosed mood disorders are major depressive disorder and dysthymia, states a study done by the Surgeon General. This should concern those not only in the education field, but parents across America about the rising amount of work and demanding schedule our students are being subject to. Impairing their mental and physical well-being does nothing to impart upon them the purpose of education. Instead, it causes them to ignore their education, as it is the cause of so much of their misery. Even while our President Barack Obama himself said, a good education is no longer just a pathway to opportunity, it is a prerequisite. Colleges and universities have been making it more and more difficult to gain admission to their institutions, let alone receive financial aid for the unimaginably high costs. We must teach students to love education, because as novelist H.G. Wells cleverly stated, human history becomes more and more a race between education and catastrophe. When humans are not educated, we revert to our basic animalistic tendencies. When humans are not educated, we fight, we have wars, we kill, we slaughter, and we trick ourselves into reasoning the unreasonable in our minds. Dr. King's nonviolent protests were not just a movement for civil rights. They were a movement for understanding. They were a movement to preserve the integrity of education in the minds of our fellow human beings. They were a movement to prove that if only we would allow ourselves to educate each other, then we could truly set ourselves free. Because as Epictetus, a Greek sage and philosopher, said all those years ago, only the educated are free. Essentially, the purpose of education allows you to create yourself, but the power of education gives you the ability to define yourself. Finally, as Dr. King said, it would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. That moment has not ended, ladies and gentlemen. Rather, we are rethinking this moment, a moment focusing less on social injustice and more on social understanding. I incite you, my brothers and sisters. Rather, I implore you to reach out and understand, to learn and educate ourselves. Because we must remember that perhaps we cannot all love each other, but that does not excuse us from attempting to understand each other. Thank you.